Inside a judge's office in eastern Texas, a volunteer from Tennessee is handed an oath of allegiance to any future government of Texas. He hesitates before signing. He wants a single word inserted into the oath. Not any future government, any future Republican government. The judge makes the change. He signs, collects his rifle, and rides for the Rio Grande. Welcome to Same Day, Different Century. I'm Zach. Today is August 17th. Almost 50 years before that oath, on August 17th, 1786, he was born in a cabin near the mouth of Limestone Creek, in what is now northeastern Tennessee. His parents named him David Crockett. The country he was born into did not agree on who governed it. 2 years earlier, North Carolina had ceded its western lands to Congress and then reversed itself. The settlers west of the mountains had already declared a state of their own and called it Franklin. Franklin elected a governor, wrote a constitution, and petitioned Congress for admission, falling short of the votes it needed. Hard money was so scarce that its legislature authorized taxes to be paid in commodities: animal skins, tobacco, corn, and apple brandy. In the year of Crockett's birth, the counties split into two governments, and soon two sets of courts were sitting in the same towns, taxing and judging the same people. Within 2 years, Franklin collapsed, and the region reverted to North Carolina, then to federal territory, and then to statehood in 1796. Land titles in that country were layered and contradictory. Military warrants, speculators' claims, and the deeds of people who had simply arrived and cleared ground. Violence sat on top of the confusion. In 1777, before David was born, his grandparents were killed by a Creek and Cherokee raiding party at their home in the Holston Valley. An uncle who could neither hear nor speak was carried off and held for years before the family recovered him. David's father, John Crockett, had fought at Kings Mountain, moved repeatedly in search of workable land, and eventually opened a tavern on the Wagon Road, where he stayed in debt. A boy born into that arrangement inherited no land, no schooling, and no standing, which made the question of how he acquired all three a matter of what he could do with his hands and his mouth. He began by being rented out. At about age 12, his father hired him to a drover to help walk a herd of cattle 400 miles into Virginia. The man wanted to keep him. Crockett left in the winter and walked home. At 13, he was sent to school, fought another boy on the road, and hid in the woods rather than face his father. He ran and stayed gone roughly 2.5 years, hauling wagons and taking day labor along the roads of Virginia and Maryland. When he came back, he was not recognized at first. Then he worked off 2 of his father's notes, 6 months of labor for one creditor and 6 for another, and was told he was free to go. He married Polly Finley in 1806 and farmed rented ground badly, moving west in stages as debts caught up. In August 1813, Creek warriors attacked Fort Mims in what is now Alabama and killed hundreds of settlers, militia, slaves, and the Creek families who had taken refuge there. Mobilization followed within weeks, and Crockett enlisted as a mounted scout over his wife's objection. What he saw there is preserved in his own words, and it does not flatter him. At Tallushatchee that November, his detachment surrounded a Creek town. Crockett later wrote that they shot the men like dogs, that a house was burned with people inside it, and that the next day, starving soldiers dug potatoes from the cellar beneath it and ate them, greasy with what had cooked above. He served out that campaign, returned home, enlisted again the following year for the march toward Pensacola, and was discharged in 1815. Polly died that same year. He then married Elizabeth Patton, a widow with 2 children and property of her own, and moved again. Office came to him almost incidentally. He was made a town commissioner and a justice of the peace, and he said plainly that he decided cases on natural-born sense rather than law learning. He was elected colonel of a militia regiment, then to the Tennessee legislature in 1821. A flood destroyed the mills he had built with his wife's money, so he moved west once more, to the Obion country near the Mississippi. His new neighbors sent him back to the legislature in 1823. By his own account, he killed 105 bears in a single season. That was not sport. Bear meat and skins were tradable value in a place with almost no currency, which is the same reason Franklin had once collected taxes in deerskins. In 1827, the district sent him to Congress. He arrived with one governing purpose. The settlers of West Tennessee were living on ground the state had already promised elsewhere, to North Carolina's Revolutionary veterans, and to endow colleges. Crockett wanted the people actually occupying that land to be able to buy it at a token price, or receive it outright. His own Tennessee colleagues wanted the proceeds to fund education, and speculators wanted the warrants honored. He introduced versions of the bill across 3 Congresses. Every version failed. The central legislative project of his career produced nothing. That failure pushed him away from Andrew Jackson, the most powerful man in Tennessee politics and the president his district had elected him to support. The break was finished in May 1830, when the Indian Removal Act came to a vote in the House. It passed by a handful of votes, 102 to 97. Crockett was the only member of the Tennessee delegation to vote against it. He knew what it would cost him at home and said he would sooner be honestly and politically damned than hypocritically immortalized. He was damned, briefly, defeated in 1831, then returned in 1833, and in the interval he became something more useful than a congressman. The anti-Jackson coalition that would become the Whig Party needed a frontiersman of its own, and here was one who had voted against Jackson on land and on removal. An unauthorized book of Crockett anecdotes appeared in 1833. He answered it in 1834 with a narrative of his own life, written with a fellow congressman, largely to reclaim the story from people selling it without him. He toured northern cities. Newspapers floated him for the presidency against Van Buren. A stage comedy of the period featured a roaring frontier braggart whom audiences immediately identified with Crockett. When the actor playing the part bowed to him from the stage in Washington, Crockett stood and bowed back, and the house applauded. He was cooperating with a caricature, and the caricature was outgrowing him. In 1835, his district turned him out by a few hundred votes. He told his constituents they could all go to hell, and he would go to Texas. Texas was then in open revolt against the Mexican government, and Texas was promising land to men who arrived armed. He left Tennessee that November with a small party, crossed into Texas after Christmas, swore the amended oath in January, and reached the Alamo on February 8, 1836. A letter to his daughter that winter said he was in good health and hoped to make a fortune for the family. It is the last of his writing we have. Santa Anna's army arrived on February 23rd and laid siege at the Alamo for 13 days. Roughly 200 defenders held a compound built as a mission, not a fort. Before dawn on March 6th, an assault force of well over 1,000 came at the walls from 4 directions. The fighting lasted only 90 minutes. Every defender in the compound was killed, including David Crockett, who was 49. How he died is where the record divides. A narrative attributed to a Mexican lieutenant colonel, José Enrique de la Peña, describes a small group of defenders taken alive after the fighting and executed on Santa Anna's order, and names Crockett among them. Other Mexican sources also mention captives killed that morning. For years the diary was fought over, and in the 90s it was called an outright forgery. Document and ink analysis in April 2000 supported its authenticity, and most historians now treat it as a real 19th century manuscript. What it proves remains contested. Whether Crockett was in that group has not been closed. The version that most people picture, swinging a rifle at the last man standing, owes far more to later illustration than to anything a witness actually recorded. The legend then outran the record entirely. Comic almanacs bearing his name were already on sale a year before he died, and for 2 decades, in which he rode lightning and wrung the tail off a comet. More than a century later, a Disney television series and its theme song made him king of the wild frontier and sold $300 million in Crockett merchandise to American children. Almost none of it required him to have existed. The congressman who lost every land bill he wrote and cast the loneliest vote in his delegation against removal was flattened into a hat. He signed his name David. Nearly everyone who has made money from him, then and since, has called him Davy. That same day, different century. I'm Zach. We'll be back tomorrow with another date, another story. Thanks for listening.